And hello, welcome back. It is now 2022. We are now 2 years past it, or current year. Well, shit, I forget what current year actually is. But in any case, there's this one article that I feel that I've seen and I kind of want to give a once over because I think it was brought to our attention, but it never really happened in there. So, what if women just don't like men? The economic consequences of women's divestment from men. This is kind of an interesting article because it looks at the fact there and it says, what if? And just what if women and men don't really like each other all that much? And it's an interesting thought experiment because it's a question I pondered myself. In order for the species to continue, we as humans have to be willing to, pair off, have children, and get on about our day. I mean, we are biologically wired for that. But, even as people have noticed, there seems to be kind of this subtle awakening that maybe we're just not all that compatible, it's really kind of a weird thing when you think about it. But I'm going to go ahead and get into this article more, and I think we'll get into that more as we go through. But this kind of looks at it through the lens of an economist. So, the author does suggest that if you, before you read this, you may want to consider purchasing the Book of Numbers. Oh, hello. Here it is over there. That's a very alluring set of numbers. And the statistics of which will provide a lot of context to the article below. So, economics greater than women. A regret I have had about my blog, podcast, internet career is that I had to abandon economics long ago, and in true economist form, speak to what my audience wanted me to: women. To this day, I still have an intellectual interest in economics. I'm fascinated by inflation and how the past 4 presidents' printing presses have priced millennials out of housing. I love how all financial methods of valuing stocks are now obsolete, rendering most of the financial service industry equally so. And I'm actually looking forward to sharpening my economic chops, shopping the globe for a new country replete with low taxes, low debt, no root beer float requirements, and low obesity rates. I would love to write about these things, but the largest and most in-demand market right now is women, am I right? Because half the population so desperately wants the other. And I suppose he's probably talking about the rise of this different male culture. You've got your betas, you've got your alphas, your simps, your sigmas, all these really interesting things that are just going on right about now. And it's kind of interesting when you kind of look at it like that. There's the hypocrisy of the feminist movement on where they demand not to be objectified, but they'll slobber all over Chad Muscleshirt in an instant as soon as he shows up. And the reason is because he doesn't give the woman the attention she so desires. In a way, it's kind of this twisted game of pursuee and pursuer. Women always like to be chased, but every once in a while, the guy wants to be chased by the women. It's how we look at things in that kind of context. The Chads get chased, the betas do the chasing, and it's just kind of this weird conga line that goes on about. So, in all fairness, I have never really abandoned economics because while we can talk about international trade with China for the global price of oil or whatever cryptocurrency is doing, by far the single largest market in the world is men's desire and pursuit of women. And if you really wanted to put numbers on it, the vast majority of GDP is created as a consequence of men's pursuit of women. And if you can optimize that relationship/pursuit, you will do more to increase humanity's standard of living than the industrial and information technology revolutions combined. I don't know. I would kind of have to disagree with this. When you look at it, I suppose maybe through the lens of Joe Schmo, who is doing the majority of the buying? Women with their gatherer's instincts of going around comparing things. Back in the old the hunter-gatherer days, men would go out and do the hunting. They were, the more physically adept at it. And, Tom Pinoy would say, that men, once upon a long age, would literally be able to just run their prey to death. But the thought process of a hunter is that you can't just find game, and let it go and hope you get a bigger one. Game doesn't work like that. If you wanted to hunt, if all you could find was this scrawny little fawnling that was barely worth the scraps of meat, that's what you got, because there was never a guarantee that you could find a bigger, better one before the sun went down and the night predators came out. So you took what you got, and that was the hunter mindset. Now, as opposed to the gatherer mindset, women would go out and they would go hunting in the berry bushes. Not as exciting or thrilling as the hunt, but it was a necessary variation to the diet. Even the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons, they understood that you needed a varied diet to survive. Hunting, fishing, berry gathering. We are omnivores, for God's sake. We're not meant to live specifically on an all-meat or all-vegetarian diet. We are meant to take from both. That is how we are biologically designed. And so, women had the luxury of passing up the smaller stuff, when you're going berry hunting, to look for the biggest and the best. And that was how they were wired. And you see it today, monitoring, when you monitor, their buying habits. Back then it was berry bushing. Now it's, it's sale hunting. There's the meme going around on, how Black Friday, women would normally say, oh, I'm not interested in this $200 a purse that's available year-round. But then you got this $500 purse that gets slashed to $200 on Black Friday, and women are basically killing each other to get that. So I don't really agree in that the vast majority of the GDP is of men's pursuit of women. The vast majority of today's consumerism appeals more to the female gatherer instinct of trying to find the best and passing over what was, crap for the better deal. Women could afford that. Gatherers could afford that. Hunters, not so much. Hunters, you had to take what you can get. Alright, so this provides me with a little bit of forgiveness, because in all reality, we are at the ground floor of economics. We are not at the atomic level where all of economics begin. Without the original trade between men and women, no economy would ever exist. And in this 2 decades-long meta-study I've been part of, called The Red Pill, is more important, germane, and relevant to the profession of economics than literally any other economist is doing in the world right now. And I literally mean that. The work I've done will have more ramifications for the world of economics than any other economist alive today. Not because I'm a genius, but simply because they're fishing in all the wrong holes. And so it is with a heavy heart that I share my latest sexual economic observation and epiphany. Not because I'm a doomer or a black pill, but because it's economic reality. And, if I'm right, the real-world ramifications of this observation are very dire indeed. Now, this is kind of where we get into the crux of the article, that maybe women don't really like men all that much. I mean, considering what I've seen, I'd probably believe it. So, a very dark thought experiment. The current assumption or prevailing thoughts within the red pill community is that deep down inside, women want men. But due to the feminist leftist indoctrination they receive from 5 Until Death, women are somehow tricked into spending their fertile years eschewing men and instead pursue soulless education and careers. Furthermore, capitalism, advances in society, and democracy have afforded women careers, as well as a welfare state, eliminating their dependence on men. Not wrong. This means that all relationships between men and women are now voluntary instead of compelled, technically freeing women from men. But without men, these poor women forego a true and love and meaning in life, throwing away their fertility and beauty away on careers and leftist political causes, dying angry old spinsters and cats, and $250,000 in student loans for their master's and social work degrees in the end. We try to stop them, warn them, convince them to return to traditionalism. But our care and concerns are met with the accusations of patriarchy and sexism instead. And thus, we all conclude, women. Am I right? But come on a journey with me, if you will, and assume what feminists say is true. That women are not, in fact, being naively duped into promises of careerism, corporatism, and a welfare state. That women are not, in fact, after a night of night clubbing, crying into their box of wine at night, pining for a man. But instead, women not only don't need men, but really don't want them either. Now, I suppose, you can look at this and kind of quirk your eyebrow. But again, this is primarily a thought experiment. But even still, I kind of have to look at this and go, what exactly are you talking about? Because this is more or less what's happening. It's what feminism has necessarily done to women. And then you see them in their later years when they're no longer fertile. They want to settle down. They want to have some stability in their lives. They're no longer interested in partying. They've looked around. They've seen their friends pair up, or they've looked around. They've also seen their friends as lonely old spinsters, and everybody's just bashing on men, and eventually that gets old after a point. You do something for long enough, and it gets old and boring. And then you actually, think about maybe trying the forbidden fruit, as feminism has literally considered meant to be forbidden. Feminism does everything in its power to drive women away from men. We don't need no man. We're strong, independent, and we can live on our own. We can be both hunter and gatherer. You're not biologically wired for that, sweetheart. But, alright, well, we'll go ahead and indulge you in this thought experiment. So let's say that, women don't really want men. So it takes a bit of removing human emotion from yourself, but look at some statistics and facts as if you were an alien from outer space and looking down at society. First, there is perhaps the most modern metric of women's interest in men, online dating analytics. Joker at Better Bachelor did a decent breakdown of the numbers, but the short version is that women only swipe right on 1 in every 100 men, and that's out of 1%. Only 1 in 100 do they ever go on a date or have relations with. I don't know about you, but if I was an actual alien looking down on Earth, I would view 1 in 10,000 event as a pretty convincing proof that women don't really like men. Second, if Tinder is too modern an example, perhaps the genetic history of the human race may convince you. Based on a DNA study conducted at the University of Arizona, only 5.9% of males reproduced, while nearly every female did. Admittedly, many men died in earlier times, many men were enslaved, and powerful men had concubine and harems. But even accounting for that, more modern times, 1,000 years ago, show only 1 in 5 men got to pass on their genes. Again, most women seem to not like most men. Well, now he's talking about the 80-20 rule, and that 80% of women will only chase the top 20% of guys that they can get. So, when you break that down and you account for, as time goes on, and so on down the list, the bottom 50% of all men will never have a chance with any women, period. And we're talking like the 1s and 2s types of women. So third, online dating and DNA are marred with their own inherent problems. Simply polling young women about their life priorities is a much more direct and accurate way to gauge their interest in men. And while there are many studies and polls, this one from CNBC shows that men are 4th on the list by career, education, and financial stability, aka paying off their student loans. Even kids don't come into play until 7th place, and this was for women between 30 and 45. If men are 4th on that list when women are squarely midlife / half dead, and your youth and beauty is the only thing the counterpart is really interested in, it speaks volumes to how little genuine interest women have in men. Now, this is, one that even I have to throw a little skepticism behind. Because, again, the thing you have to understand is that women are more social than men in most concepts. Men, for the most part, are more likely to be individualist in what they want. They're more likely to go against the grain and not care as much. As Jordan Peterson would say, men are more likely to be disagreeable than women. For women, the real strength, and this is kind of a learned instinct from human behavior over the years, women have this compulsive need to be in the tribe. So when you've got these very loud feminists basically saying that, oh, you don't need no man, and you do have, liberation through the welfare state and basically the government paying for everything, then they're more likely to want those things. Now, if that stuff maybe wasn't readily available, think about it in truth, sure, they'd be looking at that. Maybe we're kind of getting off into the weeds here on this end, but when you think about it, divorcing women from men through the use of bigger government, basically to provide for these women, that's really how all this kind of played out. When you're really kind of thinking about it, and you're sitting here wondering, it's like, why are these women saying they don't need no man? Well, when we look at the traditional conservative values, women were reliant on men to go out into the world, get resources, come back, and provide those resources. And it was the woman's duty to basically take care of the house. They took those resources and created the home. They created the environment that would allow them to produce and raise children. And because there is not only a long gestation period for human females, it's also it's a very long period, and they don't have that many kids. Like, having things like twins and triplets, multiple births, that's kind of a rare event. You can cheat it a little bit with fertility drugs and whatnot, but that's another conversation entirely. But when they don't need an individual man to provide resources because daddy government's got them covered, they start to be a little more vapid and vain. They can afford that. And yeah, things like men and kids would probably come down the ladder a little bit. So, let's see. Fourth, disparate sex drives and prostitution. Now, this is kind of an interesting argument here. A common canard you'll hear from posers in the red pill community is that women like sex just as much as men. Translation, I have so much sex because I'm so alpha, brah. That's such a blatant lie that I have to laugh every time I hear it, because if women like sex just as much as men, we would overpopulate and destroy humankind in about a generation. I'm guessing you have not paid much attention to the pro-abortion crowd that's been springing up, my dude. So I kind of have to laugh at this idea here. It's not wrong if you think about it. If the alpha chads in the red pill community, the top 10-20% of men that are getting the attention in sex, from their viewpoint, sure, it damn well looks like women want sex just as much as men. The thing is that they want you, so they're chasing you, and they're willing to use sex to get you, basically to lure you in like that, because that's what they have. That's what they bring to the table. So yeah, I can agree that that's kind of a ridiculous thing in there, but at the same time, believing that women, believing that we would overpopulate and destroy humankind in a generation, like I said, you clearly have not been paying attention to the pro-abortion crowd. Additionally, the fact prostitution only goes one way for 99.9% of all transactions is proof that women do not like sex or men anywhere near as much as men like sex and women. And while methodologies are a little fuzzy on how precisely to measure man versus women's sex drives, a rough average of 9 to 1 is good enough for ballpark standards. That 9 to 1 can be flipped to a 1 to 9 approximate of women's fractional interest in men. Fifth, let's say you're alpha, brah, and let's say you convince a girl to marry you. Presumably, that is an admission on the woman's part that she is interested, at least, in one man. Furthermore, she is also presumably wishes to procreate with you, but whatever the act of marrying a man states about women's original interest in men, the interest is quickly eliminated once they get divorced. And with 50% of marriages ending in divorce 75% of the time initiated by women, even marrying a man isn't a gauge of interest. You throw in the fact that only 14% of marriages are happy, 86% of women don't even really like the man they married. You're going to have a hard time convincing actual aliens from outer space that women have any interest in men when 86% of the time they choose a man till death do them part, they still end up regretting it. Well, going back to your original start at the top, if we actually poll these women themselves, do they really regret it, or are they just monkey branching? Are they just kind of waiting until the next best thing comes along? Because when it comes to women's sexual interest, you know, what they want on a on an instinctual point is that they want the best that they can get. Again, because it takes so long to raise a human child from infancy to what we consider adulthood, the amount of resources and investment that go into that, the long gestation period on top of that as well, women are going to want the best that they can get. And if they find something better, they're going to be attracted to that. And there is the saying, I believe, familiarity breeds contempt. And I think that's kind of an interesting point when you get into it. You know, when it gets too familiar, too safe, the excitement kind of drains out of that. And then, you know, they've had the one or two kids in there, and it turns out that this guy isn't everything, you know, that they'd hoped he'd be. And then you get this next new thing coming down. He's mysterious, he's powerful, and that can be a pretty powerful attraction to a woman who's bored. And that's why you see so many of them initiate divorce in the first place. It's that, well, maybe they do regret it on some level, tying themselves down, and when their nature is to breed with the best, top, powerful males. And for men, it's to, you know, have as many children as possible with as many different women as possible to ensure that, you know, you propagate. Alright, well, let's continue then. And sixth, I'm always one for taking inventory of your personal experiences. If anything in this world has taught me is that society likes to lie to the individual to take advantage of them. True. B, that telling every young person to go to college, that you're not popular in school because you don't wear this type of shirt, or an entire generation of economists saying that there is no housing bubble when there is one. Modern day society will go out of its way to keep up a Pocatem village of lies instead of admit the truth. And so I ask every man to ask himself one simple question. Have the majority of women you have had an interest in treat you with kindness or interest in your past? Once or indifference, aloofness, or even malice and spite? And I'm going to bet the vast majority of experiences for the vast majority of men have been proving women's general disinterest in men. You can couch all the above in the historical fact that women have for eons depended upon men for their survival. I can totally understand and see where women have no interest in men. I can even go so far as to see the feminists' view that women were oppressed and needed to be freed of men. Though I do not agree, I can see their point. And I can see where disparate sex drive floods women with an annoyed amount of unwanted attention, further repulsing them from men. And now that they're free, either through a career or through the welfare state, or both, I have to conclude that a significant percentage of the behavior we're witnessing in a significant percent of women is authentic. Sadly, a significant percent of women just don't like men. A significant percent of women don't really want anything to do with men. And unless you are an absolute 9 or 10, and I would argue Gaussian, not linear, women really do not have an interest in your average guy or everyday Joe. Well, now we're going back to the 80-20 rule. So men going gold. But with everything in physics and nature, there has to be balance. And the relationship between the sexes is no different, because whereas women have an interest in men, only 11% of men do women. Unfortunately, men have evolved over time to compete and produce to get this dwindling percentage of marginally interested women. And this has resulted in the inconvenient truth that men account for the majority of economic production, true, an even larger percent of real economic production, carpentry, electricianship, and engineering, true, and nearly all technological innovations. Again, true. And most of those technological innovations were labor-saving devices for women. And then whichever, those would compete for it to become the brand names. And I guess you could say that women would determine those brand names. It's like, which one do women buy the most becomes the brand name, and there you have it. And here we return to boring old economics, because if you haven't been paying attention to the news, women's effective and stated disinterest in men has resulted in about 2 generations of men increasingly going galt. Because if they're not going to get married, fall in love, or have children, what precisely do they have to get out of bed in the morning for? This is an actual interesting question, one that I have to ask myself as a single individual at the age of 32. And I have had no success. I'd had one relationship. I had that one kind of ended. I had tried to go out on a date one other time. I got ghosted, and the rest of it, I've just been neck deep in lesbians. Labor force participation for young men has been going down when, in theory, it should be stable, as all young men presumably would want to get out there, start a career, and, at minimum, enjoy life. Consequently, with fewer men working and an increased percentage of them living at home, and easily triple at that, live off a subsidy of their parents, this is one of the main complaints my female clients, as well as I'm sure nearly all young women, have today about men. Because how do you date, let alone marry, somebody who lives with his mother? Here we got some stuff here. Let's see. Fewer young men are working in the workforce. As you can see, it looks like there's been a steady decline since 1961 to about 2020. I'm betting this really nasty drop-off has to do with the pandemic and all the businesses shutting down. You got kind of a slow growth trending a bit upwards as things, quote-unquote, recover a little bit, but it's probably going to be a bit of a shortage. I doubt we'll probably get that back up. Now, let's see. More young men are living at home. Yeah, it's been steadily going up as well. I think it also has to do a lot more with, the rising, what's the word I'm looking for? Cost of living. That's what I'm looking for, yeah. The rising cost of living is making it difficult to get out there on your own. I mean, I've had roommates ever since I got out there. I've never really been on my own. Even now I'm on my own, I got a roommate that I'm sharing half the rent with, and it's a pretty substantial size of the paycheck. Even if I was out there by myself, I'd probably be losing half my paycheck after the third they take out for taxes. Naturally, not working, going to school, or getting some kind of training has resulted in the crisis of economically unattractive men, causing a shortage of marriageable men, because yes, it's true. Women are pricing themselves out of the dating market. They refuse to date or marry down. It's always been men who have been willing to take that risk. However, I cannot help but point out how women did this to themselves. The welfare state swings both ways, and when you put your life on easy mode with welfare checks, student loan bailouts, STEMI checks, and free health care, and don't complain when you have now 2 generations of soy boy pussies who may vote Democrat but may need to borrow money from you to pay rent, you enabled it. Well, yeah, he's not wrong there. The welfare state has definitely, I would definitely say, hurt the economy overall, because you're literally paying people to stay home and do nothing. You're literally having the government subsidize corporations and basically, They give the stim checks. People go out, buy stuff. People pay taxes with the stim checks. Money goes right back to the government through all the taxes they collect. And then it goes right back out to the people, which goes back to the corporations and back to the government through taxes. It's kind of this vicious loop. Now imagine, as a U.S. Army man, when I was paying taxes, I was literally paying my own paycheck through taxes. Ah! Yeah, would you fucking believe that? When I filed my taxes when I was in the military every year, I'd come back to it, and it's like, I'd get my money back, and it's like, well, if I'm paying taxes, that's where my paycheck is coming from. Enjoy. Or sorry boys who vote Democrat and don't support themselves also do not produce economic growth. Well, of course they're not going to produce economic growth. They're literally taking money from the government and putting it right back in the government's hands. Again, through taxes, back to the corporations, and those corporations pay taxes, which then goes right back to the individual. I'm sure Tanner strums his acoustic guitar real well with his musical therapy degree part-time, playing at the old folks' home on a taxpayer grant, but he is less than half productive as his grandfather, World War II generational counterpart, who was producing cars or something society could actually use at the factory. Again, not wrong. Consequently, in taking away any romantic incentive men would have had traditionally work, family, love, wife, children, you destroyed their work ethic. Well, again, not wrong. I mean, if I am literally working for myself and I'm supposed to enjoy life just, by myself, what do I really need to work for? Because I can live on, by myself, I can live on a fraction of a paycheck that a family man needs. And a family man would probably use most of his paycheck to pay for his, what he needs to keep his family hale, hearty, and healthy. It's probably all the same thing there. Yeah, but it also didn't help that you paid them not to work out blind, naive society. No. It also didn't help that you paid them not to work out blind, naive, socialist political stupidity. Thus, it should be no shock we all suffer with economic growth rates less than half of what we had back in the 40s and 60s. Fair point. Back then we didn't really have much of a welfare state. It was after we kind of it was about the 60s where we were the hippies were basically demanding the government pay for everything but not get us into these stupid wars, and everybody got on those welfare states, so we kind of went down. So we can kind of see here sort of what he's talking about. I can't really read this, so I can't really make it out there, but maybe you can. I'm guessing it's... Yeah, I don't really know what this graph even is, so I guess take it for yourself. And then there is the ultimate statement a man can make about his commitment and investment in society: marriage. I truly do believe that a significant percentage of women do not like men or simply have no interest. I can also believe that a certain and significant percentage of women do not like men and want to get married. But I would also wager most women, regardless of their interest in men, on paper, want to get married. But unlike the sex market, men control the market to commitment. And here, like the economy, you can also see men going galt. Well, I guess that bicycle that the fish have no use for has no use for a fish, since fish don't really need bicycles, eh? Or are we the fish? I don't know, it's kind of weird, because when we talk about loose women, we call them the village bicycles, but when we talk about, when we talk about female genitalia, we refer to seafood, the vertical seafood taco. Alright, but seeing their old man get divorced, their friends get divorced, their buddies' $3,000 a month payment and child alimony support, higher taxes, or the simple yet decades-long consistent message that women didn't need them, men are simply exiting from the marriage market, and thus society, and thus the economy. Agreed, women may not have any interest in men, but men increasingly have no interest in marrying women. And regretful as this may be, society will not exist without men's participation in it. Well, true. I mean, you did have those one tweets where it's like, I remember there was this one tweet where it was meant to be a teaser for a show. It's like, what if the men just up all vanished one day? And then there was this one Wiccan who posted, like, finally, my spell worked, and thought that this had actually happened in the real world. But I'm also reminded of another interesting story. In New York City one time, the teachers' unions went on strike, and the author was a young child at the time. So when the teachers' union went on strike, the school was shut down, and the kids were like, cool! We get like a year and a half off while the teachers are on strike for better pay. And that's how long the strike lasted. And, it didn't really affect anybody. If anything, it kind of made things worse because you had kids, out and about, and, like, teachers' positions, they could probably find somebody willing to actually do it and whatnot. And it was, nobody was really affected except for the kids, but the kids thought that this was the greatest thing ever. Because no school while the teachers are on strike. Oh, yeah! Maybe they get bored, they go off, do crazy things like that, But, idle hands make the devil's work, and when kids get bored, they get up to some really stupid shit. Anybody remember the Tide Pod Challenge? Now, conversely, in New York, shortly after the teachers' union strike was finally settled and they got what they wanted, they didn't get as much as they wanted to. They got negotiated down. They still got themselves a raise, but it was like, in the nickels and dimes era. Eventually, the garbage, the waste management people, they decided that they didn't like what their wages were. So, the waste management, basically all the garbage men, an overwhelmingly male profession, decided, they wanted more money, so they unionized and they went on strike. They stopped working, and because they stopped working, all the waste just started to pile up, and within a week, the garbage men got everything that they wanted, and they had to clean up they cleaned up the city, because the smell was just so unbearable. Like, no trash was getting picked up, but people just continued to, throw out their regular trash like nothing had changed, and it just got piled up, and it was so bad. But, when the men checked out of society, they got what they wanted changed real damn quick. Alright, so the real kick in the economic groin. If the macroeconomic picture painted above wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. Because whether we like to admit it or not, the truth is that men produce the majority of real stuff in the economy. If you don't believe me, try this little exercise. List the next 5 things you're going to buy. Gas, toilet paper, massage, whatever. Also consider everything that goes into the production, manufacture, transportation, and delivery of those products. So even if it's a massage, that massage parlor requires computers, electricities, insurance, construction, furniture, etc. Now, go to this site and move the cursor along those data points to find the profession/workers that go into making those products. And what you realize is that the vast majority of those workers that are going to produce those products are men. And yeah, when you really think about it like this one, like what really goes into making toilet paper? Like, consider, you've got these dumbasses who think that meat just magically pops out of the back of the grocery store. Well, no, You've got the farmer or rancher that raises that meat, but, what tools does the farmer use? Those were likely produced in steelworks or other production factories. And what happened to the steelworks? Well, everything that was used to make the steelworks to produce the farmer's tools, all the computers, the troughs, the lathes, the molds, the steels, that all had to be mined up and formed in other steelworks and built up and whatnot. The tools to make the tools to make the tools to make the meat. And then on top of that, even when you build all the way up to the farmer, then you've got, the butcher. The farmer's got to get his meat to the butcheries and whatnot else. So now you've got the truckers, and Tom would probably talk about the entire process of how that transportation is in there shipping. You've got the clerks that do the paperwork to make it good. You've got the actual truckers themselves. You got the warehouse supervisors. You got the farmers, the cattle trough movers, and everything that goes into that just to get, you got this real complex system just to get the meat from the ranch to the butcher. And then once it's through the butcher, there's the packing process and everything they use to pack and create the packing and everything, and then it's got to get shipped again through the truckers, and then it finally makes it to the supermarket where then it's packed in the back room. You got the stalkers, the movers, and everything else it takes to unbox it, get it onto the shelves, get it nice and properly organized, and then it's made into the consumer's hand. And consider what the consumer even needs to get to the supermarket in the first place, and everything the supermarket needs to run. Again, you got more clerks, you've got more inventorying equipment, you got all the computers to run that stuff, and then the car that the consumer uses to get from their home to the market, everything that went into making the car, the roads, the buildings, everything else. Then you go back home, you got, the whatever fuel source uses to power the electricity or natural gas or whatever oven it is, and then you have the appliance that you built to cook the meat and make the meal and all this other stuff. When you really look at just, a simple meal of meat that you cooked yourself, you got this gigantic economy just around the production and sale of meat. And even if you did this yourself, you're still putting in a whole bunch of stuff. Even if you made everything yourself, that's a lot of labor just to make the tools to go hunting, to get the game, prepare the game, cook the game, and everything else. I mean, whew! That's a doozy. It even says here, you don't have to consider what product you're going to buy. Just scroll on the light side of the curve, and any intellectually honest person will realize that it's the men that produces the lion's share of anything that really matters in this economy. And on the left side, though admittedly there are some legitimate professions, nurse practitioners, sonographers, etc., the majority of the jobs listed there are nowhere near as vital to the economy or complete make-work welfare jobs, social work, nonprofits, etc., that are disproportionately employ women. So, not only will the normal nominal economy contract linearly as men retreat from the labor force, it will disproportionately affect the things we demand and need the most, exponentially lowering our standards of living. And it's true. I remember, I think it was Hungary or Romania. It was one of those little Eastern Bloc countries that decided it was not going to enforce gender equality in college professions. And what happens is that the men all disproportionately went to production, manufacturing, tradesman jobs, all jobs they went work with their hands, had practical value, and actually made profit. And all the women disproportionately went to the social jobs, the healthcare providers, the teachers, and everything else, because men and women have different interests. And even though 90% of all the medical classes in college were filled by females, and 90% of all the trade classes were filled with males, the population was, I believe, just job satisfaction and overall happiness in the population of that country skyrocketed, and everybody was amazed. It was because their satisfaction in their jobs was so high. Everybody was just overwhelmingly productive, as opposed to in the United States, everybody's just miserable all the time. So there's that. But the real kick in the groin, economic groin part too. But it gets even worse than that. Because just like women disproportionately voted to put life on easy mode for men, thus resulting in soft, unemployable soy boys, we were also lied to now 3 generations of men as well as women about the value and veracity of their degrees. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is a labor shortage of skills that matter. Ask any suburbanite soccer mom about how easy it is to find a landscaper, and she will frustratingly explain to you that they're booked out till next year. Ask any clean-fingernailed MBA mid-level manager about getting car repairs done, and he's frustrated his mechanic won't be able to get to his car until next month. Employers are desperate for engineers, accountants, and anybody with a modicum of talent or skill, and even getting people to show up on time seems to be a chore. But what precisely did you think was going to happen when you propagandized generations of young men and women with relatively female, idealistic poppycock of follow your heart and the money will follow, let alone that you decide what you're going to do for a living and then the rest of the world will forcibly abide? The country is in desperate need of linemen, welders, CPAs, and even simple landscapers, and you've raised a labor pool of self-righteous liberal arts majors who can't even lift a roll of sod. Worse, it's not like you can just flip a switch and poof, all those worthless social science majors suddenly know how to weld or program a computer. It will take, at minimum, 10 years of hard, dedicated retooling of people's skills as well as the entire education system. In the meantime, things like your heater, car, computer are just going to have to wait and are going to cost a lot more. Thank God we have millions of liberal arts majors who can lecture you about racism and the patriarchy in the meantime. Well, that's what happens when you listen to the whole colleges should be free and you have the government subsidizing everything. And then you basically let women into the workforce expecting them to fill 50% of these trades that they're not actually happening in. Because let me tell you what is actually happening in these colleges. What's happening is that you have this call to arms to get women into these male-dominated trades. High-level business positions, programmers, mechanics, technicians, coders, programmers, all very high-intensity, very high-demanding stuff. It's basically the cry of, we need more women in these positions of power. So they go to school for this. And they decide that, it's not for them. They'd rather transition to something that's easier for them. And that's where these liberal arts degrees come into play. That's life on easy mode. It's a relatively short program. It's real easy to do. It's really just listening to the teacher spout propaganda, repeating it back, and if you say it back right, voila, you're one of them. Here's your degree. Off into the world you go to make the world a better place. That's what's happening. We say that we want women in these positions, but women just don't have any interest in doing what it takes to get into those positions. And the relatively few that do, more power to them, I say. But yeah, you're gonna when you do that, and when you emasculate men as well, and basically saying they're absolutely worthless, they are below women, and when the women can't even hack it in these other technical professions, you're saying, okay, if I'm worth less than a woman and a woman can't hack it, what hope is there for me? Now, I know I said earlier in this video that men are more likely to be disagreeable. When you browbeat a man long enough, when you tell someone long enough that you are X, do this for a long enough time, they're gonna believe it. They're gonna believe it. Same thing with any human, really. You tell them something long enough, they're eventually gonna start to believe it. You tell men that they're worthless, garbage pieces of shit that can't compare to this absolute goddess of femininity, and eventually it's going to be true for them. And I think that's really where we've been doing a disservice to young men, because as he said, we've done this for 3 generations, and that's where the rise of the soy boy generation that's economically unattractive comes from. And it's real depressing in a way when you kind of really think about it. It's enough to make anybody think about, the black pill, and that we're all doomed. Because it's going to take some real effort to turn this thing around. But the real economic kick in the groin, part 3. And if you can imagine it, it gets even worse than that. Oh dear God, really? You're not making me feel good about this. Because I don't know if you've ever visited the bachelor pad of a single unemployed man of his 20s, but they can get by on very, very little, which consequently means that they're going to work/produce very, very little. While Stefan Molyneux opines that men can get by on 1/10 the income of a family of 4 does, and I believe him because I've lived it, yeah, preaching to the choir on that one. A better proxy of measure might be the income of differences between married and single men. There's a fancy graph there. You can see that married men make a lot more than that as well. You know, married women just kind of barely eke out when they hit about 40s. And then you can see unmarried men, you know, they're getting by on just about that much there. Kind of spikes a little bit, but then it kind of goes there. And then you got single women. Apparently they can get by on even less with the wage and salary. Now, when I look at this and I think about the disagreeableness of men, when you really think about it, single men, they can get by on very little. So, honestly, I don't think I would see any sort of single man as, saying no to more money. But, if it doesn't get offered, they're not really going to do it. Whereas a married man, he's looking out for more than just himself. So he's more likely to go in and demand a raise, demand a bigger paycheck, because I got more people to take care of then, bro. And it depends on how old you are and where you are in your career, but generally speaking, single men work, which means produce 39% less than their married counterparts. You may make the argument, well, that's because they have a wife and kids. And I would argue back, yes, that's because they have a wife and kids. Yes, as we just said, they have a wife and kids. Married man is more likely to go into his workplace and demand a bigger paycheck. Not so much with the single guy. Maybe that's what I need to consider in my line of work. Because the above data, as well as any unemployed 20-something bachelor's apartment will tell you, is that without women or family, men have no incentive to work anywhere near as hard because, frankly, they have no reason to live aside from themselves. And this would all be fine and well if men and women equally produced things that mattered in this economy, as a proportional drop in population would require proportionally less of real economy goods and services. But since men are far the main producers of valuable items in the economy, read labor-saving devices, men's non-participation in society is going to impoverish everyone. Yes, we can get by importing labor from overseas to do the work most American men won't. Yes, we can import real goods made, again, largely men overseas from China, etc., and can keep prices low, for now, with a world reserve currency. But without these international trade ticks or incredible luck of having the world's reserve currency, Americans could very easily be facing a nominal drop of 39% in GDP. More if you factor in the fact that drop would be for important things like food, energy, housing, and medicine, and not laughably worthless things like college lectures, HR, diversity and inclusion consultants, Oprah books, and tarot card readings. Hey, I don't know, man. Those tarot card readings were big back in the olden days. But the final solution. Whether women's lack of interest in today in men is authentic or a byproduct of propaganda, or likely a bit of both, it doesn't matter. It is what it is. Because men cannot act upon what we guess to be in the hearts of women. Men can only act upon whatever empirical actions women put forth in society. And with women's general disengagement from men, sometimes even somewhat hostile, men are increasingly forced to live with their lives under the expectation that the majority of them will not marry, let alone happily, let alone with kids. This will continue the trend of men going galt and lowering the standards of living. However, while the majority of men will disengage and will only put forth marginal effort in life, the men who do put forth the effort to attain excellence present an interesting situation, and ultimately solution to society's production and even repopulation problem. Because for all the feminist propaganda that women don't need or want men, most women, I do surmise, want children. But nearly none of them would be willing to settle for anything less than near perfect. And here we dive into what we were talking about in regards to women's pursuit of the best, because on an instinctive level, because of how humans produce, that's what they want on the lizard brain. And with the historic human race track record, only 6% of men will pass on their genetics onto the next generation. We may see a reversion back to that norm. And whereas today the norm is monogamy, sorta, we can already see pressures, trends, and even technology moving to polygamy, where an elite 6% of group of men impregnate nearly all the women. The trend in news media pushing for open relationships is indicative of a polyamorous society. Women's insistence for only the top 20% of men on online dating is also indicative of a harem-like society. Women's reluctant willingness to share an alpha instead of having a beta all her own reinforces this. And women celebrating articles that heralds advances in an IFV or egg freezing technology show that men may not even be necessary. And so what we will see is a continuation of what's been happening for the past 40 years anyway. A migration from a nuclear family to a state-financed, subsidized, female-headed family, while an increasing percentage of men drop out of the workforce as they are essentially relegated to a slave class to produce things for people they have no familial, romantic, sexual, or love interest in. Economic growth will continue to slow, if not contract. Debts and money supply will be inflated as a psychological magic trick to fool people into thinking the economy is stable. Trade deficits will drastically increase as foreign countries will essentially enslave their workers to produce things Americans won't produce themselves. And our entire GDP will consist of elementary school teachers, HR directors, nonprofits, body positivity bloggers, and marketing consultants. I would normally say enjoy the decline, but it is going to be such interesting times, I would have to say enjoy the show. Trust me, you will not see anything more spectacular in your entire life. I just hope you know how to prepare for it. That's effectively the end of that article. It's an interesting thought experiment when you really think about it. If you take what the feminists have been saying at face value, that women don't need men, and you also take into perspective the welfare society that we are on, you would also think of that as true. If you also take women's sex drive on the instinctive lizard brain level, then yeah, it's you know, for guys like me that aren't these top tier alphas and don't pull as much money, have good looks or anything else, it's kind of definitely a depressing world for us, and it's enough to make you want to take that that short walk off a tall building. Ultimately, not much more I can say on that. I think this article is going in the right direction in regards to saying that women would not need or want most men. But it is kind of an interesting loop that we are basically headed back towards. We're headed back towards that era of warlords. If you think about it in terms of this, we've bred ourselves into this. Back in the olden warlord days, when warlords would go around marauding, kidnapping, pillaging, and whatnot, when they did have women that would stand up and say, I refuse to be your concubine, I would rather die than betray my husband, warlord would say, okay, wish granted, shink, and that was it. And the only women that would survive these raids would be the ones who, were not going to be faithful in the first place. So, you have the women that would genetically be on the monogamous level getting killed off left, right, and the center, and the only women that are reproducing are the ones that are willing to betray in the interests of self-preservation. That's what we've done to ourselves. And you still see it today in the third world countries. You know, I remember this one story. You know, where this one tribe was going around marauding, and they basically whittled this tribe down to nothing. And the son was talking about how his father killed his wife and his daughters, the author's sisters, specifically to prevent them into falling into the hands of the enemy, knowing full well that they would basically be subject to horrific experiences. You know, these same horrific experiences of sexual assault that women here in the first world say is such a prevalent problem, and they won't even bat an eye to things like, you know, what's going on in the third world. Why? Not in their backyard. And I think it's an interesting perspective to think that, you know, women... I wouldn't say that all women have no interest in men, because, you know, that does not take into account variations. But when you look at it, you know, maybe if you're looking at it from an alien's perspective, it is difficult to say, looking at it from an outsider's view. You know, an alien you know, if I would come down and say to, you know, a man, it's like, bruh, you know, here's what I'm seeing from the outside. She just doesn't like you like that, bruh. And it's frustrating in that way. When you're, you know, it makes sense that many guys would eventually just kind of succumb to this idea that life is worthless and not worth living when there's no one else to live it for but you. You know, I'm speaking for myself. It feels like that God damn it, it's really hard to put in perspective just because of how personal this is to me. And it's I go to a very dark place in that, you know, it's the ideas that were held up to me when I was younger, that I would go out and have a family and a house, and I would you know, continue for that to turn out to be a pipe dream. It is a bitter pill to swallow. And that's just where I am with my life. And looking at, you know, the world going the way it has, and even, you know, just looking at it from this economics point of view, that, you know, it's not going to happen. It's yeah, I don't really have much more to say on that. It's kind of really does go to a dark place, but take that what you will, and maybe y'all have some ideas in the comments on how this really goes. But there's really not much more I had to say, so take this as you will. I'll post a link to this down in the description section. And what are your thoughts on this? Do women really just don't like men? And should we really take this economics things as proof? Or are we really returning to an age of warlords? Anyway, go ahead and put down what you think in the comments. I've rambled on for long enough. Hope to see what you think soon.